Last January feels like a lifetime ago now, but I can still remember the exact moment everything shifted. It was a cold Wednesday morning in Seattle, the kind where the air hangs heavy and the sky looks washed out. I had just gotten home from an early meeting at Northwest Freight Solutions when my phone buzzed. It was my older sister, Becky, asking if she could swing by for a minute. She didn't say why, just that it was important. Becky never used the word important unless she wanted something, but I told her to come anyway. That was always my mistake, thinking it was easier to say yes than deal with the fallout of saying no. She arrived 10 minutes later. In such a hurry, she barely greeted me. Her hair was pulled back in a messy knot, and she kept glancing over her shoulder like someone had followed her. She reached into her oversized purse, pulled out a thick manila envelope, and placed it on my kitchen counter. She asked me to hold it for 24 hours. She said it was just boring paperwork she didn't want cluttering her house because the twins kept getting into everything. She sounded breathless, a little frantic, but I didn't push for details. I should have asked more questions. Instead, I nodded and told her it was fine. Just a small favor. She kept checking her phone while she talked, the screen lighting up every few seconds with calls she declined before the first ring finished. When I asked her if everything was all right, she laughed in a way that felt forced. She said she was just having one of those mornings. Then she hugged me quickly and rushed out as fast as she came. I stared at the envelope on my counter longer than I should have, wondering why I felt uneasy. There wasn't anything special about it, just a plain office envelope, but it sat there like it carried weight. I tried to shake it off and get back to work. I had spreadsheets to finish and emails to review, but my mind drifted every time I glanced toward the counter. Nothing about the envelope made sense. Becky wasn't the type to keep paperwork organized. She had never asked me to store anything for her before. By late afternoon, I had convinced myself I was overthinking it. Until my apartment buzzer rang again. A delivery driver stood in the hallway holding a medium-sized box. My name was on it, but the return label listed Becky's address. When I called to ask her why a package addressed to me came from her place, she brushed it off with another quick laugh. She said she didn't want porch thieves grabbing it. Nothing to worry about? But there was something off. The return address listed a business park in Tacoma, and when I typed the company name into my phone, the search results showed a debt collection agency. My stomach tightened. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, so I didn't open the box. Instead, I slid it next to the envelope on my dining table, telling myself I'd deal with it tomorrow. I spent the rest of the day in a strange fog, working but not really engaged. My supervisor, Mark, stopped by my desk and asked if I was doing all right. I told him I was fine, just tired. I didn't mention the envelope or the package. At the time, it felt too small to bring up. Later that night, while I was brushing my teeth, I heard my phone vibrating on the kitchen counter. The screen flashed a number I didn't recognize. I ignored the call at first, but then it came again, and again. I finally answered, hesitant and tired. A deep male voice asked if I was Emily Hartman. When I confirmed it, he asked if I had recently received documents on behalf of a Rebecca Caldwell. My heart dropped into my stomach. I asked who he was and what documents he was talking about. There was a pause before he told me he had the wrong number and hung up. It didn't feel like a wrong number. I stood there holding the phone, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I replayed the conversation over and over. How did he know my full name? Why did he think I had documents for Becky? What kind of documents? I walked back to the dining table and stared at both items again, the envelope and the unopened package. They looked even more out of place in the soft kitchen light. My mind raced through possibilities I didn't want to consider. Money trouble, legal trouble. Becky wasn't irresponsible enough to drag me into something serious. Was she? But the tremor I heard in her laugh earlier told me I already knew the answer. I reached for the envelope, feeling its weight in my hands, and for a moment I considered opening it. But I hesitated. If Becky was in trouble, opening it might involve me even more. I wasn't ready for that. I set it back down, took a deep breath, and tried to steady myself. I told myself I'd talk to her in the morning, get a clear answer, draw a line if I needed to. But as I turned off the lights and headed to bed, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a voicemail, I pressed play and listened to a voice say Becky's full name slowly and deliberately, followed by words too muffled to make out before the message cut off. I stood in the dark kitchen, the cold tile under my bare feet, staring at nothing as a feeling settled deep in my chest. It wasn't fear exactly, but something close to it, like the sense that a door had opened somewhere behind me and I hadn't realized it yet. I knew that whatever this small favor was, it had already begun to pull me into something I didn't understand, and I knew I wouldn't be sleeping much that night. The kitchen stayed dark as I stood there trying to calm the uneasiness twisting in my stomach. By morning, I had barely slept, and the first thing I saw when I walked into the kitchen was that envelope sitting exactly where I had left it, like it had spent the night watching me. I made coffee and tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself it was probably nothing, that Becky had just gotten herself mixed up in something minor. I would talk to her, get clarity, set boundaries. That was the plan, but plans never hold when it comes to Becky. By 8:30, my phone buzzed with another text from her. It was short, careless, thanking me again for helping and saying she might need me to sign for another delivery at some point. My chest tightened. She did not ask. She informed me. That familiar dynamic crept right back in, the one I thought I had grown out of. I told myself to stay calm and typed a quick question asking what exactly the deliveries were. But before I finished, the screen lit up with another message from her. She said she was running into meetings all morning and would call later. She would call later was code for not answering anything I asked. I left it alone and tried to focus on work. I walked into Northwest Freight Solutions carrying my laptop bag, and the exhaustion of a night spent worrying. Mark noticed it the moment I stepped into the office. He asked if I was coming down with something. I told him I just had a rough night and promised I would get the morning reports done. By mid-morning, I was staring at shipping figures and route adjustments, but none of it was sinking in. My mind kept drifting back to Becky, the envelope, the call from the unknown man. At one point, I caught myself typing the debt agency name into my search bar again before I quickly closed it. I did not want to go down a rabbit hole until I had real answers. Around noon, Jenna stopped by my desk with her lunch. She is the kind of co-worker who notices everything without you having to say much. She asked if I wanted to eat outside for a bit. I hesitated, then agreed. We sat on the concrete steps outside the building, cars passing by on Elliott Avenue, the air damp from last night's rain. She finally asked if something was wrong at home. I almost told her everything, but the words felt too embarrassing to say out loud. I said my sister was going through something and it was starting to spill into my life more than usual. Jenna nodded with that quiet understanding people have when they grew up with siblings who pulled them into their storms. She told me to be careful not to let someone else's chaos hurt my stability. I promised her I was fine, even though I did not believe it myself. When I got home later that afternoon, another box sat by my door. My name was on it again. I checked the return address and felt that same cold weight settle in my stomach. It was the same Tacoma Business Park. I brought it inside and set it next to the envelope without opening it. I had 2 items in my apartment linked to a debt agency and a sister who refused to explain anything. That was not a coincidence, no matter how I tried to frame it. My phone buzzed again. Becky. She thanked me for grabbing the package. She said she would explain everything soon, but right now she just needed me to trust her. Trust was a big word coming from her. I asked why her mail was coming to me at all. She replied with a shrugging comment about porch thieves again. The same excuse she used yesterday. The dishonesty stung more than the inconvenience. I stared at the message and typed, then erased, then typed again. In the end, I sent nothing. Over the next few days, the favors escalated in that subtle way Becky mastered. Each one small enough on its own that saying no felt unnecessarily harsh. She asked me to store a tote bag because she was reorganizing her garage. She dropped off a stack of mail to sort because her house was too chaotic with the twins. She asked me to sign for a piece of certified mail because she was stuck in traffic. Each time she said it was the last thing, that she appreciated me, that she was overwhelmed. And each time I told myself it was temporary. At work, the tension was starting to show. I missed an internal check-in because Becky had called begging me to keep an eye on the kids for an hour after school. I showed up to the meeting late and flustered, and Mark noticed. He asked if something serious was going on at home. I said no, just family stuff. That was the moment he reminded me gently but firmly that this quarter was important and I needed to keep my focus. He was kind about it, but the warning was clear. I walked out of his office feeling ashamed, frustrated, and trapped. By the end of the 6th week, I counted 17 separate favors Becky had dumped on me. 17. And somehow every one of them felt like something I was obligated to say yes to, because saying no meant dealing with her anger and the guilt she had perfected over decades. One night, after a long day at work and 2 more messages from Becky asking if I could hold on to some documents for a few more days, I finally let myself sit down at the dining table and look at everything she had left with me. The unopened boxes, the envelope, a stack of forwarded mail, even a random folder she had handed me one morning saying she did not want it to get wet in the rain. All of it was taking over my space and my peace of mind. As I was sorting through the mail, one envelope slipped out and landed on the floor. It had a pale blue seal and a barcode across the back. The sender was not Becky. It was a billing office from Tacoma. The contents inside were not meant for me, but because Becky had put my address as a forwarding location, the mail had started redirecting. I did not open it, but the outside markings were enough. It was a notice of delinquency, a second notice. It hit me then that Becky was not just hiding bills from her mailbox. She was actively diverting them to mine. That realization sank deeper than I expected. It meant the first favor had never been small. It meant she had been involving me in something she could not manage, maybe something she was running from. It also meant that if anything escalated, my address would be tied to it, not hers. I sat there for a long time, listening to the faint hum of the heater and the distant sound of traffic outside. I tried to give Becky the benefit of the doubt, the way I always did, but the voicemail from that unknown man kept replaying in my mind. Someone out there believed I had documents meant for her. Someone was looking for her through me. That night I stacked everything back into a neat pile on the table, telling myself I would confront her in the morning. I rehearsed what I wanted to say. I thought about boundaries, the ones I had never enforced, the ones she had trampled for years without a second thought. But before I could call her, another delivery arrived the next afternoon, addressed to me with her handwriting all over the shipping note. My hands shook as I picked it up. It felt heavier than the others, not just in weight but in implication. Whatever Becky was tangled in, she was dragging me further in with each passing day. I set the box down slowly, realizing this was no longer something I could ignore, and that pretending it was harmless was only making everything worse. I felt something shift inside me, a quiet tightening around my chest, the early warning of a storm forming in a clear sky. I did not know yet where this was headed, only that the ground beneath my feet no longer felt steady. I stood there staring at the box, trying to steady my breath. When my phone buzzed again, it was Becky, asking if I could watch the boys for just a couple of hours after school because she had an appointment she could not bring them to. I almost said no. I had rehearsed it in my head the night before, but something in her message felt urgent, almost desperate, so I told her to drop them off. I regretted it the second I hit send. She arrived faster than I expected, barely giving me time to grab my shoes. The twins, Noah and Liam, climbed out of the back seat with that tired look kids get when they have been stuck somewhere too long. Their shoulders were slumped and their faces were pale, and when I asked how long they had been in the car, they looked at each other before Noah whispered that they had been waiting for a while because Mom had to talk to someone. Becky waved at me, already backing out of the parking lot, saying she would be back soon. Her voice was thin, jittery, the kind that comes from either panic or denial. I could not tell which one. Inside my apartment, the boys settled on the couch with crackers while I tried to shake off the knot forming in my stomach. They were good kids, sweet and patient, but their eyes had that quiet uncertainty I remembered from when Becky and I were young, the kind that comes from watching adults make choices that do not make sense. I hated seeing it in them. Around 4:30, I stepped out to drop the recycling in the bin near the elevator. When I came back up, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Mrs. Gloria Ramirez, who lived a few doors down, stood outside my apartment with her grocery bag in hand. She asked if everything was all right because she had seen the boys alone in the hallway earlier. I told her Becky had just dropped them off. She pursed her lips and said she had seen Becky leave before she knocked. That uneasy weight pressed down on me again. We talked for a moment, and she mentioned she had seen something similar back in December. The twins standing in the cold lobby while Becky argued on her phone outside by her car. I felt a sharp rush of anger, not at the boys, not even at Gloria for saying it out loud, at Becky for letting this pattern grow into something dangerous. When Gloria left, I went inside and checked the time. 2 hours had passed since Becky dropped them off. She should have been back. I sent her a message asking when she would return. No reply. Another hour passed. Nothing. I called her twice, straight to voicemail. I made dinner for the boys and sat with them, keeping my voice light even though my mind was churning. They ate quietly, occasionally glancing at the door as if hoping it would open. At 8:15, I sent Becky another message, firmer this time. I asked where she was and if she was coming back tonight. She answered with a brief line saying she was tied up in something and that the boys were fine with me. That was all. No apology, no explanation, just expectation. I stared at that message, feeling the frustration rise like heat in my throat. She had not asked if I was free. She had not warned me she might be gone for hours. She had simply decided I would deal with it. That awareness settled in my chest like a stone. This was not a small favor. This was her default. Later that night, after the boys had fallen asleep on the pull-out couch, I finally allowed myself to sit down. My apartment was quiet except for the hum of traffic outside and the sound of rain starting against the windows. I should have felt peaceful. Instead, I felt a subtle panic that I kept trying to push away. Something was unfolding around me, and I did not have a full picture yet. I only had pieces. I thought about the unopened boxes, the envelope, the voicemail from that man, the bills redirected to my address, and now the twins being left with me without warning. All of it pointed to a truth I did not want to acknowledge. Becky was spiraling, and I was the nearest place for her to land, whether I liked it or not. Around 9:30, I heard a soft knocking. I checked the peephole and saw Gloria again, wearing a cardigan and holding her laundry basket. She apologized for bothering me and said she had just come up from the lobby and noticed the boys' backpacks on the floor outside earlier. She said she worried someone might take advantage of kids waiting alone, especially this late. I assured her they were inside now and thanked her for looking out for them. As she turned to leave, she paused and lowered her voice. She said she did not mean to intrude, but she had lived on this floor for 20 years, and she knew when something was off. She said Becky had been acting strange for months. She said she had seen men stopping by, late-night arguments in the parking garage, quick drop-offs that did not look like casual errands. Her tone was gentle, not accusatory, but the meaning landed hard. This was bigger than overdue bills or disorganized parenting. Becky was hiding something deeper. After she left, I checked on the boys again. They were curled under the blanket, their chests rising and falling softly. I stood there watching them, feeling that mix of love and dread that comes when you are responsible for someone else's well-being. At least for the night, I wondered how many times Becky had left them in uncertain situations without anyone knowing. Around 11, I tried calling Becky again. Nothing. I sent one final text telling her the boys were asleep and she needed to update me. I waited, pacing my living room, listening for my phone. When the reply finally came, it was just 4 words. Working on something important. The way she wrote it made my skin crawl. It did not sound like her. It sounded like someone trying to keep a story together with tape and hope. I went to the dining table and looked at everything she had placed in my life. The documents, the boxes, the redirected bills. Each piece felt like a loose thread of something larger, something she did not want to face. Something she was letting slip into my world because she could not manage it herself. I sat there for a long time, trying to steady my breath. I remembered the boys in the hallway. I remembered the way Becky rushed out of my apartment earlier that day. I remembered the shaking in my hands when I picked up the latest box. The truth kept pulling at me. She was not asking for help. She was shifting responsibility, inch by inch, favor by favor, until it no longer looked like a request. It looked like a transfer. I turned off the lights and got ready for bed. But I could not stop thinking about how easily she had left her children with me, how calmly she dismissed my concern. As I lay there listening to the rain intensify, something in me felt the first quiet flicker of fear that this was only the beginning. and that Becky had already decided how much more of her burden I would be expected to carry. The thought lingered long after the apartment went still, and the only sound left was the steady rhythm of rain against the glass. The next morning came heavy and gray, the kind of Seattle morning that settled on your skin and made everything feel slower. The boys were still asleep on the pull-out couch, their arms tangled in the blanket. I stood there watching them for a moment, wondering how many mornings they had woken up like this, in places they were dropped without explanation. I made oatmeal, packed them small lunches from whatever I had in the fridge, and waited for Becky to show some sign of responsibility. She finally texted at 9:20, saying she would pick them up in an hour. She did not apologize or ask how they slept. She just said she needed to talk later. By the time she arrived, the boys were ready to go. Becky walked in like nothing unusual had happened. She gave each child a quick hug and then turned to me with that brittle smile she used whenever she wanted to shift the blame onto someone else before the argument even started. She thanked me in a tone that did not sound like gratitude. It sounded like expectation. Then she asked if we could talk outside. I followed her down the hallway, feeling the tension build before we even reached the elevator. She stopped near the stairwell, crossed her arms, and said I had made a big deal out of nothing. She said she told me she would be back soon, and I should know she is swamped and overwhelmed. She said I was blowing things out of proportion. My heart thudded in my chest as I reminded her she had been gone for 6 hours. She brushed it off and said parenting is complicated and I should be more understanding. Something inside me snapped a little. Maybe it was the exhaustion from the night before. Maybe it was watching the boys cling to each other when they woke up confused. Maybe it was the accumulation of 17 favors that had turned into silent obligations. I told her she needed to stop leaving her children with me without asking, that I had a job and a life too, and that it was not healthy for her or the boys to treat my apartment like an emergency shelter she could drop into whenever everything fell apart. Her expression hardened instantly. She said I must have forgotten what family means. She reminded me that Mom always said we needed to look out for one another. That phrase stabbed something old and familiar inside me. Look out for one another had never applied equally between us. It had always meant I needed to clean up her impulsive decisions, soothe her eruptions, and fill whatever gaps she created. Before I could answer, she muttered that she had more important things to handle and ushered the boys toward the elevator. She turned once more before the doors closed and said I needed to be more flexible for the sake of the family. Then the elevator slid shut and the hallway fell quiet. I stood there shaking, the frustration pressing into my throat. When I walked back to my apartment, I found a voicemail from my mother. She said Becky told her I refused to help during a stressful time, and that she was disappointed I could not be supportive. She said Becky had been through enough recently, and that I should show some compassion. She did not ask what had actually happened. She never did. I waited a few hours before calling her back. When she answered, I tried to explain what really happened, that Becky had left the boys without warning, that she had not responded for hours, that this had been a pattern for weeks. Mom sighed the way she always did when she was preparing to dismiss something. She said Becky had always handled a lot, and I should try to lighten her load instead of adding to it. She said I was overreacting and being dramatic, that the boys adore me and I should feel grateful they feel safe enough to stay here. The conversation slipped into that familiar script where every feeling I had was turned into evidence of selfishness. My father chimed in from somewhere behind her, saying I lived alone, had no kids, and had plenty of time compared to Becky. He said a little help would not hurt me. I tried to argue that it was no longer a little help, but he cut me off. My voice tightened and I felt that old childhood helplessness rising inside me. I ended the call before I said something I would regret. The rest of that day I walked around with a knot in my stomach, replaying every sentence from that conversation. It amazed me how quickly my parents defaulted to protecting Becky, how little they seemed to care about the impact on me or the welfare of the boys. It did not matter how much evidence I presented. Their narrative had been written decades ago and nothing could alter it. Later that afternoon, as I tried to distract myself with laundry, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Michael. His voice was tight, a forced calm that did not mask the irritation underneath. He asked what happened yesterday because Becky came home in tears. I told him exactly what happened. There was silence on the other end, long enough for me to think he hung up. Then he asked if Becky mentioned anything else, something about finances. I froze. Becky had never admitted anything to me about their financial situation. I told him I had noticed some confusing mail arriving but had not opened anything. He sighed, sounded defeated, and said Becky had been keeping things from him too. He said she had mentioned seeing a financial advisor, but kept dodging questions when he asked what the meeting was about. He said things had been tense at home for months. The crack in his voice made me feel a small spike of sympathy for him. He had always seemed like a grounded man, steady and patient. Hearing that Becky was feeding him the same half-truths she fed me made everything feel heavier. He ended the call saying he hoped Becky would get herself together soon. I could hear the exhaustion in every word. That evening, as I was cleaning up the kitchen, I noticed a stack of Becky's mail still sitting on the table. I picked it up intending to bring it to her later, but one envelope slid out again. The blue seal caught my eye. I stared at it, tempted to open it, but guilt and caution kept me from doing it. I tucked it back into the stack and set everything aside. Still, I could not stop thinking about all the signs pointing to something bigger, something Becky was drowning in while pretending she was only splashing. Around 7:30, I sat on the couch trying to clear my mind when my phone lit up once more. This time, it was the school, Pine Ridge Elementary. They left a voicemail asking me to confirm my availability as the new emergency contact listed for the boys. My breath caught. I had never agreed to that. I opened the school portal message that followed. Becky had put me down as the primary backup contact that morning. I felt the shock run through my body. She had not asked. She had not even hinted. She had quietly and deliberately placed me in a legal role that could hold responsibility if something happened at school. I sank into the couch cushions, staring at the message until the letters blurred. It was not just irresponsibility anymore. It was a pattern, a plan. A shifting of weight from her shoulders onto mine without my consent. The kind of thing that, once in motion, would be almost impossible to undo. I sat there until the room grew dim and the last of the daylight faded, feeling something in me tighten with resolve for the first time. I knew I had to say something the next time she tried to push another favor on me, but a part of me already sensed she would not hear it, not until something forced her to. I knew she would not hear it, and that thought stayed with me the entire night. By the next afternoon, I was trying to lose myself in work, hoping the spreadsheets and shipping schedules would quiet the noise in my head. For a while it worked. I kept my focus on container counts and delivery routes until everything felt almost normal again. Then, just before 3, my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number from the Seattle Police Department. My breath caught before I even answered. The officer on the line asked if I was Emily Hartman and if I was at home. I told him I was still at the office. He said officers had been dispatched to my address because someone reported that 2 children were left unattended for an extended period. I felt the air leave my lungs. He asked if I was the primary caregiver for children at that residence. My voice cracked when I said no. I grabbed my bag and rushed out before he finished speaking. It took me 20 minutes to get home, but it felt like hours. My mind racing through every possibility. Why would anyone think the boys were alone in my apartment? Did someone mistake a noise or a neighbor? I kept hoping it was a misunderstanding, but deep down I already knew Becky was involved. When I reached my building, 2 police cars were parked by the entrance. Officer Daniels and Officer Kim stood outside my door. I hurried to them, shaking, insisting no children were ever left alone in my apartment. They spoke calmly and respectfully, but their questions cut straight through me. Had the boys been in my care earlier today? Did I agree to watch them? Had Becky notified me of any drop-off plans? I told them everything. I explained how Becky had been leaving the boys without asking, how she had put my address on school documents without permission, how she had been using my home as her fallback without actually telling me. They listened carefully, taking notes. Then they asked if they could step inside to confirm no children were present. I opened the door for them, ashamed even though I had done nothing wrong. Officer Kim noticed the tension in my hands. She spoke softly, saying this kind of report can be filed anonymously and that false reports sometimes happen when there is family conflict. She did not accuse me of anything, but hearing the words neglect report made my chest tighten. I never imagined my name and that word would appear in the same sentence. After they finished the walkthrough, They asked one more question that sent a chill through me. Had anyone ever pressured me to assume responsibility for the boys? I told them yes, absolutely yes, again and again. They exchanged a look I could not read. When they left, they did so gently, reminding me to keep documentation of every interaction, every text, every drop-off. They said if this kind of report happened again, I needed to protect myself first. Their tone was kind but firm, the kind of tone that made it clear this was not a small matter. Right after they pulled away, my phone rang again. It was Michael. His voice was loud and strained, like he was trying not to yell. He said Becky came home in tears claiming I had refused to help and that I abandoned the boys and caused unnecessary stress. He demanded to know why the police had been called. I tried to explain she left them with me without notice and had not responded for hours. He did not believe me at first. He said Becky was already under pressure at work and that I should be more patient. I felt anger rise in my throat as I told him the truth again. Eventually, his voice softened. Not because he believed me, but because he sounded tired. He ended the call quickly, saying he would talk to her. I sank onto the couch, shaking. The apartment felt smaller, like the walls were inching closer. I thought of the boys and the backpacks on my hallway floor days earlier. I thought of the envelope and the packages piling by my dining table. And I thought of how easily Becky had turned the police toward my front door without a second thought. The weight of it all pressed against my ribs. I knew I could not ignore what was happening anymore. I could not afford to hope it would resolve on its own. My job was already affected. Mark had pulled me aside that morning, asking why I seemed distracted and whether I needed personal time. I told him I was managing fine, but I knew he did not believe it. I barely believed it myself. Late that evening, after pacing my apartment for what felt like hours, I gathered my laptop and every piece of Becky-related mail into one place. I started a digital folder and began documenting everything: dates, messages, call logs. I uploaded photos of the packages, the envelope, even the school notification listing me as an emergency contact. My hands shook as I typed, but the act of organizing it made me feel less helpless. Around 9, the phone rang again. This time it was a number I recognized. Becky? Her voice was sugary at first, the tone she used when she was pretending to be calm. She said she heard the police went to my place and insisted she had nothing to do with it. She said someone must have made a mistake. She said I should relax and stop imagining things. That familiar twisting in my stomach returned. I asked her directly if she had filed the report. She acted offended. She said she would never do something like that. She said I always assume the worst of her. Then her voice sharpened and she said, if I had just been more cooperative, none of this would have happened. Cooperative, that was the word that told me everything. I ended the call without responding. I could not fight her anymore that night. Her logic was a maze designed to keep her from ever looking at her own reflection. I locked my phone and sat on the floor, leaning back against the couch, feeling the exhaustion settle deep into my bones. An hour later, as I was finally starting to unwind, a soft knock sounded on my door. When I opened it, Gloria stood there holding a warm cup of chamomile tea. She said she heard the police earlier and wanted to make sure I was all right. I thanked her and let out a breath I did not know I was holding. She walked inside and looked around the apartment with gentle eyes. She said she had seen the boys alone more than once, and that if I needed someone to confirm that, she would be willing. I felt tears prick the corners of my eyes. It had been a long time since anyone believed me without hesitation. Gloria placed a hand on my arm, steady and reassuring. She said children should never be caught in the middle of someone else's crisis, and that if things continued like this, I needed to protect myself. Her words were grounding. They reminded me I was not losing my mind. I was witnessing something serious unraveling. After she left, I sat with the warm tea in my hands until it went cold. The events of the day turned over and over in my mind. Police at my door, Becky shifting stories, Michael doubting me, my parents choosing to believe whatever story Becky told them, and me, trapped in the middle, trying to hold my life together while someone else kept pulling it apart. I finally stood, turned off the lights, and pulled the curtains closed. The night outside was still and quiet, but inside my chest everything felt unsettled. I sensed the ground shifting again, just slightly, but enough to warn me that the next time it moved, it might pull me deeper into whatever Becky had set in motion. I woke up the next morning with the same heaviness in my chest that had followed me to sleep. I tried to shake it off, telling myself to focus on work, to breathe, to pretend life was normal for a few hours. But even as I drove into the parking garage at Northwest Freight Solutions, I kept checking my phone, half expecting another message from Becky or some fallout from the police visit. Nothing came, which somehow made me more anxious. Silence from Becky was never peaceful. It was preparation. By the time I got home that evening, the sky had turned that soft, dim blue Seattle gets before rain. I carried my groceries up the stairs, unlocked my door, and stepped inside. The air felt wrong the moment I walked in. Not cold, not warm, just disturbed. The same way a room feels after someone has moved through it. I set the grocery bags down and glanced around. A blanket on the couch was shifted. A glass on the counter was out of place. The faintest smell of apple shampoo lingered in the air, and nobody in my home used that scent. My heart started to hammer. I checked the door again. The lock was definitely turned when I arrived, but the inside chain was undone. I never left it that way. I walked cautiously down the hall, not sure what I expected to see, but every step deepened my certainty that I was not alone earlier. In my bedroom, the closet door was slightly open even though I always kept it closed. Nothing looked missing, but everything felt touched. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Becky. She thanked me for being understanding and said the boys had enjoyed their time yesterday. Then she said she hoped the house was comfortable. My breath left me all at once. I called her immediately, furious, terrified, confused. She picked up on the second ring, sounding entirely casual. She said she stopped by earlier, just to let the boys nap for a while. And since I was not home, she let herself in using the key Mom had. She said she thought I would not mind since I was always so generous with my space. My voice shook as I asked why she would ever come into my home without asking. She brushed it off and told me not to be dramatic. She said she did not want to keep the kids in the car. She said she was overwhelmed and needed a quiet moment. She said I should try to be more supportive since I had the luxury of living alone. The anger rose so sharply it felt like heat. I told her she had violated my privacy. She told me she did not have time for my attitude. Then she hung up. I stood in the center of my apartment, struggling to steady my breath. I realized how deeply she believed her needs could override every boundary I had. I walked through the apartment again, taking pictures of anything that seemed out of place and saving the timestamp. I opened the blinds slightly and looked toward the hallway. I needed confirmation I was not imagining things. Just then, a soft knock sounded. I opened the door to see Gloria standing there with her cardigan wrapped tight around her shoulders. She asked if everything was all right because she had seen Becky in the hallway earlier. She said Becky had come up around 5, looking frantic, carrying the boys in half asleep. She said Becky had been pacing outside my door before letting herself in. She said she thought maybe I knew about it. I shook my head. Gloria hesitated before adding that something about the way Becky kept checking the hallway made her nervous. She said she had checked the building's camera feed later and saw Becky leave my apartment alone, the boys trailing behind her looking groggy. She said the whole thing felt wrong. Hearing that confirmed everything. It was not just a boundary violation. It was disregard, total disregard for my privacy and the safety of her children. I thanked Gloria and watched her walk back to her place, her steps slow and concerned. The moment she disappeared behind her door, I grabbed my keys and drove to a hardware store. I bought a new lock, a reinforced deadbolt, and a coated keypad unit. I spent the next hour installing everything myself. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped the screws twice. When the last bolt clicked into place, I finally felt the smallest flicker of safety, as if I had taken back one corner of my life. I sat on the floor afterward with my back against the wall, listening to the quiet. Inside that small silence was the truth I had spent months trying to avoid. Becky was not simply overwhelmed. She was not just disorganized or scattered or emotional. She was making choices that endangered the boys and dragged me into a world I never agreed to be part of. She was hiding things, financial trouble, possibly legal trouble, and she was using me as her buffer. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a voicemail from her. She said she hoped I had not changed the lock because that would be childish. She said Mom gave her the spare key for emergencies, and I was blowing things out of proportion. She said if I started locking her out, she would have no choice but to involve our parents again. Then she ended with a line that made my stomach turn. She said she hoped I remembered what loyalty looked like. Loyalty. That word always came from her only when she needed something. I turned off the phone and moved through the apartment slowly, returning blankets to their place, stacking my paperwork neatly, folding the shirt she had tossed over the chair. Each small act felt like reclaiming my space. Just as I was putting away the groceries, I heard light footsteps outside my door. They stopped right in front of it. A moment passed, then another. I stood completely still. The footsteps shifted, then faded down the hall. I waited until the hallway was silent before I dared to breathe again. I walked to the window and looked outside at the dark street lined with wet pavement. My reflection in the glass looked like a stranger, tired, raw, not frightened exactly, but aware, hyper-aware. Something inside me settled with a quiet, heavy clarity. She had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. She had stepped inside my home without consent. She had involved my address, my safety, my livelihood, my name. And she was not done. I felt it like a shadow shifting beneath the door. For the first time since this began, I understood that whatever Becky was running from, whatever she was trying to hide or delay, she believed she could place between herself and the consequences by dragging me into the middle. I sat down on the edge of the bed and tried to gather my strength, knowing deep in my bones that this was not the kind of storm that passed quickly. It was the kind that changed the shape of everything in its path. I lay there for a long time trying to steady my breath, telling myself that changing the locks would at least slow her down. But deep inside, I knew Becky did not accept boundaries. She treated them like suggestions, temporary inconveniences she could argue or guilt her way through. I kept replaying the way she had moved through my apartment, the way she believed she had every right to enter my space, as if my life existed only to catch whatever fell out of hers. By morning, I was exhausted, but something in me had hardened. I tried to distract myself with work. I pushed through morning reports and answered emails, but my focus was scattered and thin. Around lunchtime, Jenna stopped by my desk and asked if I wanted to walk with her to grab a sandwich. I went because I needed sunlight and noise, anything to drown out the leftover fear sitting behind my ribs. As we walked through the lobby, she said I looked like I had barely slept. She asked gently if my sister was still causing trouble. I hesitated, then nodded. She told me to take care of myself. Her voice had that steady warmth older women sometimes have, that sense of knowing exactly what family can do to a person. It helped, even if only for a moment. When I got home later that day, I felt a strange relief knowing the new lock was in place. I set my bag down, turned on the kitchen light, and tried to unwind. The peace lasted 20 minutes. Then someone started pounding on my door with the force of a fist landing over and over. The sound echoed through my apartment and rattled the picture frames on the wall. My heart lurched. I already knew who it was. Becky's voice filled the hallway. She demanded to know why her key no longer worked. She said I had embarrassed her, that I had acted like a child, that I had crossed a line. Her voice rose higher with every sentence, spilling anger into the hall loud enough that the neighbors would hear. I walked to the door but did not open it. I told her through the wood that she could not let herself into my home anymore, and that she needed to stop involving me in things I had not agreed to. She ignored everything I said and kept repeating that I had betrayed her. The boys were with her, their small voices tangled under her shouting. I could hear Noah asking if he had done something wrong and Liam asking if I was mad at them. My chest tightened with helplessness. I wanted to open the door for them, not for her, but I knew that would only give Becky what she wanted. She needed me to comply, not care. Caring she used as leverage. Suddenly, Gloria's voice carried down the hallway. I had never heard her sound so stern. She told Becky to stop, saying the boys were frightened and that the entire floor could hear her. Becky snapped back, saying it was none of her business. Gloria told her that children crying in a hallway always made it someone's business. Something in her tone must have hit Becky because she went quiet for a second. I pressed my ear to the door. I could hear the boys sniffling. I could hear Becky's breath uneven with frustration. I wished the walls between us were thicker or thinner. I could not decide which would hurt less. Gloria asked Becky if she understood how dangerous it was to drag children around so late at night. Becky shot back that she was doing her best and that people should stop judging her. Gloria did not raise her voice. She simply told her that this was not the first time she had seen the children left alone in unsafe situations, and that if it continued, she would have to contact someone who could intervene. The air in the hallway shifted with that sentence. Even through the door, I could feel it. In that moment, everything went still. Then Becky's voice cracked with anger again. She accused me of turning the neighbors against her. She accused me of trying to make her look unstable. She accused me of being jealous of her life. A sentence so absurd it made my eyes burn. I stood silently behind the door as she kept spiraling, her rage circling in every direction except the one that mattered. Eventually, her footsteps moved away. I listened to the soft shuffling of the boys and the quick click of her shoes on the carpet. A door closed down the hall. Then the building went quiet again. I stayed by the door until my breathing slowed. Only then did I open it a crack to check if Gloria was still nearby. She stood at the far end of the hallway, leaning slightly on the railing that overlooked the lower floor. When she saw me, she walked back toward my apartment, her face filled with concern. I stepped out and thanked her. She nodded and said someone needed to say something because the boys looked terrified. She hesitated before adding that she had seen Becky arguing with a man in the parking garage earlier in the week. She said it looked heated, and Becky kept repeating that she had it under control. Gloria said she did not want to pry, but she felt it might be related to everything spilling over now. I felt the words settle heavily inside me. Becky's world had cracks I was only beginning to see. Later that night, I sat at the dining table, gathering every piece of mail and package Becky had redirected to my address. I opened the laptop and added timestamps and notes to the folder I created, organizing everything I could remember. As I listed each incident, a picture emerged. Becky had been in trouble long before she asked for that first favor. She had been dropping breadcrumbs of chaos for months, maybe years, and I had been sweeping them up without realizing I was clearing a path for her to widen her mess. I paused when I reached the photo of the blue sealed envelope. Just seeing it made something tighten in my throat. Everything pointed back to it. The urgency in her voice, the man who left the voicemail, the packages from Tacoma. She had handed me evidence of something she did not want to face, something she wanted distance from, and she had used me to create that distance. I leaned back in the chair and closed my eyes. The room felt dim and heavy, the way a room feels when a storm is about to break. I tried to imagine what Becky was thinking when she walked into my apartment without permission, when she stood outside my door shouting, when she let her children watch her unravel. It was difficult to piece together because nothing she had done lately seemed rooted in reality. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number arrived. It was short and unnerving. It asked if this was still the right contact for matters related to the Caldwell family. No name, no explanation, just that question hanging like smoke in the air. I stared at the screen, trying to decide whether to respond or block the number. After a long moment, I locked the phone and set it face down. My hands were trembling slightly. A quiet dread pooled in my stomach. I walked to the living room window and looked out at the street below. The rain had started again, tapping softly against the glass. Cars passed slowly, their headlights streaking across the wet pavement. Everything outside looked orderly and steady, the complete opposite of the storm building inside my life. I wrapped my arms around myself and watched the street until the tension in my shoulders softened just a little. I knew this was only the beginning. Becky had crossed a boundary once, and people who cross one boundary rarely stop there. They cross the next and the next, until someone stops them. The night felt long and thin, and somewhere deep inside I sensed the next boundary she would cross was already taking shape. The rain softened sometime before dawn, and I stayed by the window until the sky faded from black to gray. My eyes burned from lack of sleep, but my mind would not quiet. I kept replaying the unknown message. Someone asking if my number was still the right contact for matters related to the Caldwell family. I did not answer, but the words stayed with me long after I locked my phone. By mid-morning, I finally managed to shower and pull myself together. I had just started a pot of coffee when a firm knock sounded at my door. Not frantic like Becky's, not hesitant like Gloria's, controlled, professional, the kind of knock that lets you know the person on the other side already expects your attention. I opened the door and found a woman standing there with a small leather folder in her hands. She introduced herself as Dana Patel, a social worker with the Department of Children and Family Services. I felt my heartbeat jump, a quick, sharp thud against my ribs. She asked if she could speak with me inside for a few minutes. Her voice was steady, understanding but firm. I stepped aside and let her in. Dana surveyed the room the way people do when they need to take in details quickly. Not judging, observing. She sat at the small dining table and explained that her department had received several reports concerning the Caldwell children and that my address had been listed repeatedly in those reports. My throat tightened. She asked if I could walk her through the events of the past few weeks. I poured her coffee because it gave my hands something to do. Then I sat across from her and told her everything. Not softened, not rearranged, not dressed in excuses. I told her about the sudden drop-offs, the hours without responses, the police calls, the redirected mail, the packages from Tacoma, the school listing me as emergency contact, the night Becky entered my home without permission. I even told her about the voicemail from the unknown man. Dana listened without interrupting. She took notes calmly, occasionally nodding as if connecting dots I could not yet see. When I finished, she looked down at her folder and said the reports their office received did not match the reality I described. Most reports framed me as an unreliable caregiver. One claimed I had refused to take the boys during an emergency and left them alone. Another said the children were often with me, suggesting I had agreed to a shared caregiving arrangement. My chest tightened as if a cold hand had reached inside. Becky had not only bent the truth, she had twisted it with deliberate precision. Dana continued gently. She said this pattern was concerning to her office because false reports and conflicting stories often indicate that someone is trying to shift responsibility away from their own behavior. Then she opened her folder and showed me a copy of a file, noting a similar incident involving Becky back in 2018. A neighbor dispute, a false accusation, an investigation that fizzled only because the witness moved away. Seeing it written in official ink made something inside me collapse, then solidify. Dana asked if I had documentation of any of the incidents I described. I nodded, got up, and returned with the folder I had started assembling. She reviewed the photos, the texts, the voicemail transcripts, the time-stamped notes. The more she read, the more her expression shifted from neutral observation to quiet concern. She sat back and folded her hands. She said the situation was serious, not because of me, but because of the boys and the unstable behavior surrounding them. She said leaving children unexpectedly, involving unrelated adults without consent, and misrepresenting caregiving arrangements were all red flags. She said her office would likely need to meet with Becky and possibly Michael as well. I felt the familiar guilt rise in my throat, the kind my family had taught me to feel whenever the truth cast Becky in a difficult light. Dana must have sensed it because her voice softened. She told me none of this was my fault. She said setting boundaries with a family member does not make me cruel or disloyal. It makes me responsible. I looked down at my hands and felt the weight of her words settle into the cracks Becky had carved into my confidence over the years. Before she left, Dana asked if she could speak with my neighbor, since I mentioned Gloria had witnessed several incidents. I called Gloria, and she came over a few minutes later, wearing her soft blue sweater. She greeted Dana politely and answered her questions with calm certainty. She described seeing the boys alone in the hallway. She described Becky leaving in a hurry. She described the argument in the hallway and how the boys looked frightened. She even offered the short video she had recorded when Becky shouted at my door. Dana thanked her and made a few more notes. Then she turned to me again. She said she would be contacting Becky within the next few days. She said I should continue documenting everything and that if Becky attempted another unannounced drop-off, I should call her office or the police immediately. She said the situation had escalated enough that official guidance was not only appropriate but necessary. When she finally left, the silence in my apartment felt heavier than before. I sat at the table staring at the coffee growing cold in my cup. For months it had felt like I was screaming underwater, trying to make sense of a pattern no one else could see. Now someone with authority had looked at the same pattern and confirmed it was real, dangerous, and not on me to fix alone. The relief was sharp and surprising, but so was the fear. I walked to the window, needing the fresh air even if it came through glass. The sky had turned pale, the rain thinning into mist. People walked on the street below with umbrellas half open. cars humming along the wet pavement. Everything looked normal, ordinary, but my life had shifted into something I did not yet recognize. I checked my phone again. No messages from Becky. None from Michael, not even one from my parents. The silence felt like a deep inhale before a storm. Around late afternoon, I finally forced myself to eat something. While I was washing the dishes, another knock sounded at my door, this one lighter, cautious. When I opened it, Gloria stood there again. She asked if the meeting went all right. I nodded and thanked her for speaking honestly. She hesitated, then said she wanted me to know something in case it became important. She had heard Becky arguing on the phone earlier that week, the same day she had entered my apartment. Becky said something about not letting things fall apart and needing someone else to take responsibility before it got worse. Gloria admitted she did not know what it meant, but it unsettled her enough to share it. The phrase settled into my chest like a weight. Someone else to take responsibility. I knew exactly who Becky meant. After Gloria left, I sat on the couch with my hands folded, staring at the blank television screen. I felt the quiet expand around me. For the first time since all this started, I understood that the path ahead would not be simple or quick. Dana's involvement meant accountability was coming, and people who avoid accountability often thrash the hardest right before it reaches them. Evening crept in slowly. Shadows stretched across the room, and the low hum of the heater filled the silence. I leaned back and closed my eyes, letting myself breathe for what felt like the first time in days. But beneath that breath was a sense of inevitability. I could feel it settling around me like a warning. Becky had not yet reached her breaking point, and when she did, I knew the next fallout would end up right at my front door. The warning sat with me all night, a low thrum beneath every thought, and by the next morning the air in my apartment felt tight, as if something was waiting to unfold. I tried to start my day as normally as possible. I made coffee, opened my laptop, and attempted to catch up on work emails, but my eyes kept drifting toward the front door. I kept expecting a knock, a text, a crisis. Instead, there was silence. Around 11, my phone finally buzzed. It was Michael, asking if we could talk. His tone was different this time, uneven, as if he already knew whatever conversation we were about to have would change something in his life. He asked if he could stop by during his lunch break. I hesitated but said yes. I wanted to believe he deserved the truth, even if he had doubted me before. When he arrived, he looked older than I remembered. His shoulders slumped under the weight of something long avoided. He stepped inside and stood awkwardly in the living room, glancing around as if expecting to see traces of his son somewhere. I offered him coffee, and he nodded gratefully, sitting at the dining table like someone bracing for impact. He started slowly. He said things at home had been tense for a while, that Becky avoided talking about money, that she had been taking long drives alone, showing up late, hiding her phone when he walked into the room. He said every time he tried to ask what was wrong, she told him he was imagining things or trying to control her. He rubbed his forehead as if the memory physically hurt. I listened quietly, letting him speak. Then he asked the question he had really come for. He wanted to know whether I knew anything about a debt agency contacting her. I took a steadying breath and told him what I could without revealing mail that was not legally mine to open. I told him about the redirected envelopes, the Tacoma packages, the man who left the voicemail. His face fell piece by piece, and I could see the moment he realized this was not new, not sudden. Becky had been lying to him for months. He looked down at his hands for a long time, before finally whispering that he had found an email on Becky's laptop 2 nights earlier. It was a message she had begun drafting but never sent. In it, she told someone she was trying to shift certain responsibilities to a family member to buy more time. She said she had someone who could act as a temporary guardian if things went badly. She had written my name. I felt a coldness spread through me. I asked if he could show me the email, but he hesitated. He said he did not want to cross legal lines since it was her account. Instead, he told me what she had typed. She wrote that I was dependable, overly responsible, and unlikely to push back. She wrote that if she framed it a certain way, people would assume I had agreed to help her. That line hit me like a blow. The next part was worse. She wrote that if she needed to disappear for a bit, she trusted I would keep things stable until she returned. Disappear? Disappear? The word echoed in my head like a fading shout. I felt something inside me tilt. I asked him if he knew what she was running from. He shook his head, but his eyes said he feared the answer. Before we could continue, there was a knock at the door. This one careful, measured. I opened it to find Dana standing there, carrying her folder again. She greeted both of us and said she was conducting follow-up meetings. She asked if we could all sit together since it concerned everyone involved. We moved back to the table. Her presence filled the room with the kind of clarity that makes lies crumble faster. She began by saying she had spoken with Becky earlier that morning. My breath caught. Dana continued, explaining that Becky had been evasive, emotional, and at times contradictory. She said Becky insisted she relied on me only because I had offered, which both Michael and I immediately denied. Dana took note of our reactions but kept her voice calm. Then she said something that made the room go still. She told us Becky had given conflicting accounts of the boys' care, at one point suggesting that I had agreed to share custody in an informal arrangement. The shock on Michael's face was unmistakable. I felt heat rise up my neck. Dana added that Becky became defensive when asked for documentation and blamed stress, fatigue, family pressure. At that point, Michael interrupted. He told Dana everything he had learned, the email, the secrecy, the financial issues. His voice cracked as he said he was afraid for the boys, afraid for Becky, and afraid of what she might do if things escalated further. Dana listened closely, her expression shifting slightly from neutral to deeply concerned. She said based on everything gathered so far, the department might need to establish a formal safety plan, one that restricted who could care for the boys and under what circumstances. She emphasized that it would not mean anyone was losing custody at this stage, but clear boundaries were necessary to protect the children. Michael nodded slowly, resigned but relieved to have someone else acknowledge how serious things had become. I felt my pulse quicken. Part of me wanted to cry. Another part wanted to run. And another part wanted to finally breathe in a world where Becky did not dictate the terms of my peace. Then Dana asked if I had more documentation. I took a deep breath and brought out the folder. She reviewed the notes, the photos, the texts, the timeline. When she reached the screenshot of Becky listing me as the school emergency contact without consent, Dana tapped her pen against the page, her expression darkening. She asked if I understood that this could be used to imply I had agreed to take responsibility for the boys on a recurring basis. My stomach tightened, but I nodded. She said these kinds of misrepresentations often appear when someone is trying to set up plausible explanations for future actions, especially when facing financial or legal pressure. The room felt heavier with every passing minute. After reviewing everything, Dana closed her folder and looked at us with steady eyes. She said the next step was meeting with Becky again, this time with clearer boundaries and possible legal oversight. She warned us that people under stress often escalate emotionally when confronted with accountability. She asked if either of us felt unsafe. The question made something deep in my chest tremble. Michael said he was worried about the boys and worried Becky would lash out if she felt cornered. I said I was afraid she would try to show up at my apartment again or use my name in more paperwork without telling me. Dana wrote both concerns down. As she prepared to leave, she turned to me one last time. She said I needed to stay firm and not take the boys unless I explicitly agreed in writing. She said I should refuse unannounced visits. She said my role was no longer ambiguous and I needed to protect myself legally and emotionally. After Dana left, Michael stayed seated, staring at the folder on the table as if it held the ruins of his family. He asked, barely above a whisper, how long I thought Becky had been planning this. I told him I did not know. But the truth was, I had a feeling it had been much longer than either of us wanted to imagine. He finally stood, thanked me for telling the truth, and walked to the door. Before he left, he turned back and said he was going to confront Becky that evening, but he did not know what version of her he would get. I watched him disappear down the hallway, shoulders heavy with dread. I closed the door quietly, locked it, then leaned against it as my chest tightened with an ache I could not name. The apartment felt dim and fragile, as if the air had been changed by everything spoken inside it. I walked to the window again, listening to the faint hum of traffic. A deep unease settled into me, not sharp like fear, but slow and spreading like smoke. Somewhere in the city, Becky was unraveling, and I knew without anyone saying it, that the next unraveling would not stay silent. The unease stayed with me long after Michael left, stretching into the next day like a shadow that would not lift. I tried to work from home to calm my nerves, but every sound in the hallway made me tense. Around mid-morning, I received a message from Dana asking if I could be available for a follow-up call later. She said she would be meeting with Becky again that afternoon. My stomach tightened. I thanked her and said yes. Hours crawled by. I tried to keep myself busy, cleaning the kitchen, sorting papers, even watering my plants twice without realizing it. The quiet felt charged, like the air before lightning strikes. Part of me kept expecting Becky to show up at my door again, but she never did. It was almost 5 when my phone rang. It was Dana. She asked if I could talk privately. I moved to the bedroom and shut the door behind me. Her voice was steady, but beneath that steadiness I sensed a weight. She said she had just left a meeting with Becky and Michael. She said the conversation had been difficult, emotional, and at times volatile. She said Becky had struggled to take responsibility, offering explanations that shifted and changed with each question. She tried to insist again that I had agreed to step in, that I was helping willingly, that I was part of her support system. But Dana had already reviewed the evidence, and she had spoken to witnesses, and she had seen the fear in the boys. In the end, Dana said, Becky had been informed that a safety plan would be put in place immediately. It required supervised care only, documented handoffs, and strict limits on who could watch the children and when. She said Becky would have to attend mandatory parenting classes and counseling sessions. And she said any future false reports or unannounced drop-offs could lead to temporary removal of the boys from her care. As Dana spoke, I felt a strange mix of relief, sadness, and quiet disbelief. Part of me had waited so long for someone else to see the truth that hearing it said out loud felt unreal. Another part of me hurt for the boys, who loved their mother even when her choices put them in impossible situations. And another part still feared how Becky would react once the shock wore off. Dana reassured me that if Becky attempted to contact me inappropriately or involve me again without consent, I should notify her office. She said I had done the right thing. She said I had been more patient than most people would have been in my position. When I ended the call, I sat on the edge of my bed, letting the silence settle around me. That night the building was quiet. No pounding on my door, no footsteps pacing outside, no startled cries from the hallway. For the first time in months, my apartment felt like mine again. I made myself a simple dinner, sat by the window, and listened to the soft hum of the city below. The next few weeks unfolded gently at first. I kept to myself, kept records updated just in case, and slowly began reclaiming parts of my life I had forgotten. I joined the project team Jenna had encouraged me to join, and for the first time in a long while, work felt purposeful instead of heavy. One afternoon, Michael called and asked if he could stop by. When he arrived, he looked worn but clearer somehow, as if a fog he had lived in for years was lifting. He said he wanted to thank me. He said confronting the truth had been painful, but necessary. He said he and Becky were trying counseling and that he was working with Dana to make sure the boys had stability. He apologized again for doubting me. He said he had allowed himself to be blind for far too long. I accepted the apology, not out of obligation, but because I could see he meant it. Before he left, he told me the boys were doing well in their after-school program and that they asked about me occasionally. I smiled, grateful for that small piece of connection that was not tangled in chaos. Around the same time, I finally decided to move. I found a smaller apartment in Queen Anne, bright and quiet, tucked near a tree-lined street with an old bookstore on the corner. I changed my number, updated my address, and gave the new information only to people I trusted. When I closed the door of my new apartment for the first time, I stood in the middle of the living room and breathed in a way I had forgotten how to breathe. Slow, deep, unhurried. My parents called occasionally, their voices softer now. They did not apologize outright, but the defensiveness that once coded every conversation had faded. They were beginning to understand that the version of events Becky shared had never matched the truth. I spoke to them with respect, but with boundaries that did not bend. As for Becky, we did not speak again. She sent a few long messages at first, filled with blame and confusion, insisting I had betrayed her, claiming she had never meant for things to go so far. I did not respond. Over time, the messages grew shorter, then stopped entirely. Sometimes I wondered what she told herself about everything that happened, but I learned not to linger on questions that had no answer and did not deserve my energy. The boys sent me a drawing through Michael one afternoon. It was a picture of a sun and a house and two little figures standing in front of it. He said they made it during art hour and wanted me to have it. I put it on my fridge and smiled every time I saw it. Slowly, my life settled into something steady again. Not perfect, not untouched, but whole. I learned to enjoy the quiet, the stillness, the absence of expectation. And I learned something I had spent years overlooking. Being reliable is a strength, but letting others misuse that reliability is not compassion, it is self-neglect. And I was done living that way. Some nights I thought back to the moment everything had begun, that first favor Becky had asked. I wondered how different things might have been if I had asked more questions, if I had said no sooner, but then I reminded myself that survival often means learning as you go. I survived her chaos. I reclaimed my home and my life. And that was enough. As I sit here now, in my quiet living room with the soft glow of the evening settling across the floor, I feel grateful for the clarity that came from everything I endured. Grateful for people like Gloria and Dana, who stepped in when the truth needed witnesses. Grateful for my own strength, even when I doubted it. If you have ever found yourself carrying someone else's storms, I hope my story reminds you that you are allowed to set your own limits and protect your own peace. And if you want to hear more stories like this, stories of boundaries, resilience, and finding your way back to yourself, I hope you will stay and share your thoughts. It means more than you know.